Prince William had entered the courtroom prepared for an uncomfortable ruling. He was not prepared to hear his mother's name, and he certainly was not prepared for what followed. As the judge described a private letter written by Diana about her sons, William reportedly stopped moving altogether. Then came the devastating detail. The document had remained hidden for years, and the court had identified Camilla as the person who had deliberately kept it from reaching Diana's children. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William kept his eyes fixed ahead as the court moved into the recovered papers. The dispute centered on private royal correspondence, meaning personal letters preserved under restricted family control rather than public records. That distinction mattered because this was not simply another file. The letter had been written by Diana for her sons, and the court's finding was specific. Camilla had knowingly kept it from William and Harry for years. The words, "my boys," changed everything. William's posture tightened, his hand closed around the desk, and the controlled expression he carried into the hearing completely cracked. Diana was no longer a historical figure inside a legal argument. She was his mother. Inside those pages were thoughts she had meant for him and Harry, words that had survived her death but had not reached them. Camilla understood the danger immediately. The Queen Consort heard the ruling from another part of the proceeding, and she knew the accusation was no longer about storage, protocol, or paperwork. It was about emotional ownership. William was now forced to consider whether someone inside his family had decided that his mother's voice was too dangerous for him to hear. Then the file produced something worse. The court identified a dated notation showing that Diana's letter had been separated from the rest of her correspondence and withheld until further authorization. That instruction was not accidental. Camilla's involvement was tied directly to the decision, turning an old archive entry into a personal act with consequences lasting for years. William released the desk slowly and pushed his chair backward, but he did not stand. The future king asked only one question. Who knew? The room seemed to contract around those two words, because if Camilla had made the decision, someone may have allowed it to stand. And the answer threatened to lead straight toward Charles. But the hidden letter was only the wound everyone could suddenly see. The deeper damage depended on what Diana had written, why Camilla feared it, and which members of the family had lived beside the secret without telling William. For William, this was never going to remain a legal story. The moment Diana's letter entered the case, the courtroom disappeared behind something far more personal. A son confronting words from a mother he had lost decades earlier. But Harry was part of those words too. So was Charles. And standing uncomfortably between Diana's sons and their father was Camilla, the woman now forced to explain why she believed the letter should remain buried. William received the certified copy in a consultation room and did not sit at first. A certified copy is a verified reproduction of a document, confirming the text matches the source. He read slowly because Diana's private correspondence offered something ceremony never could: her unfiltered thoughts, preserved without speeches or biographies. Halfway down the page, the prince reached a passage about palace tensions dividing her sons and lowered himself into the chair. Harry's name made the wound wider. Diana had written about both boys, and suppressing the letter had denied each son the same private inheritance. Their lives had already taken different paths, and now the document seemed to speak directly into that fracture. William read the lines again, realizing his mother had feared that adult conflict might become something her children carried as if it belonged to them. Charles heard that William had finished reading and said almost nothing. The king listened as an aide explained that Diana had written about protecting the boys from resentments they had not created. His face tightened. He asked whether the prince had requested to see him, then looked away when the answer came back. Not yet. That silence mattered, because William was no longer asking only who hid the letter. He was beginning to wonder who had permitted the hiding to continue. Camilla's explanation soon reached him through a documented account prepared for the proceedings. The Queen Consort argued that releasing Diana's words during an earlier period of family instability could have reopened hostility and damaged Charles's relationship with his children. She described the choice as protection. William heard something different. To him, Fear had been used to decide what a mother was allowed to say to her sons. William reached the closing lines, placed the pages flat on the table, and pressed 2 fingers against his forehead. Then he asked for the room to be cleared. Camilla's reasoning had hurt him, but another possibility hurt more. Perhaps she had never acted alone. Yet the secret had not begun in a courtroom, and it had not begun with the recovered file. Years earlier, one private palace meeting had transformed Diana's letter from a mother's message into something someone believed was too dangerous to deliver. Every buried royal secret has a moment when silence becomes a decision. In this story, that moment came years before the court hearing, during a review of Diana's remaining correspondence. The letter had been found, catalogued, and prepared for transfer. It could have reached William and Harry then. Instead, a conversation inside Clarence's house changed everything. By the end of that meeting, the envelope was removed from circulation, and the path toward today's devastating confrontation had begun. Camilla entered that review expecting paperwork, not a threat from the past. Clarence's house was Charles's official London residence, a royal home where private household decisions could be made away from public attention. An archivist had been examining unsorted correspondence linked to Diana, and most items were moving through channels toward her sons. This letter was different because it discussed Charles, palace tensions, and Diana's fear that William and Harry might one day be divided by conflicts they never created. The archivist presented the sealed letter to Camilla and explained that protocol suggested notifying both princes. She read the summary and changed. The Queen Consort asked whether the transfer could be delayed. When told the letter was intended for Diana's sons, she closed the folder, slid it back across the table, and said it should remain where it was. That request became the trigger everything else would later trace back to. Charles arrived near the end of the meeting and found the argument already waiting for him. Camilla told the king that releasing the letter could reopen old wounds, revive anger surrounding Diana, and damage his relationship with William and Harry. He did not order the document destroyed. He did not confiscate it, but he did not tell the staff to send it. His silence allowed her request to harden into policy. A handwritten instruction appeared on the file afterward. It ordered the letter removed from the sequence of Diana-related correspondence and held pending further authorization. Years later, the court compared that notation with staff testimony and linked the suppression to Camilla's intervention. More painfully, the record showed Charles had been present when the decision changed course. William absorbed that detail like a second betrayal. His anger toward Camilla remained, but now his attention turned toward his father. If Charles had known the letter existed, why had he allowed Camilla to decide whether Diana's sons could read it? The prince requested a meeting with both of them. That hesitation would return years later with brutal force, because when William finally faced them, he was no longer asking why an archive made a mistake. He was asking why his own family decided he could not be trusted with his mother's words. There was no shouting when William entered the room. That made the confrontation worse. Charles was already waiting. Camilla sat beside him, knowing exactly why the prince had come. William carried Diana's letter but never opened it. He did not need to. The words were already inside him. Then he looked directly at the Queen Consort and asked the question everyone else had avoided for years. Why did she believe she had the right to keep it? William had requested the meeting the moment he learned what happened at Clarence's house. He refused to let lawyers or private secretaries carry the anger for him. A private secretary is a royal aide managing official correspondence and sensitive communication, but this was no longer something he wanted filtered through staff. Charles insisted on attending because the decision had happened inside his household, and because his silence had become part of the evidence. William spoke to Camilla without raising his voice. That restraint made every sentence land harder. He told her that whatever she had felt about Diana, none of it gave her ownership over a mother's words to her sons. The prince said the letter belonged to him and Harry when Diana wrote it. Keeping it hidden had not protected them. It had taken away their right to choose what those words meant. Camilla finally answered for herself. The Queen Consort said she feared the letter would drag William and Harry deeper into resentment surrounding their parents, and reopen wounds Charles had tried to survive. She believed withholding it would prevent damage. Then, she admitted something darker. Diana had warned that unresolved adult conflict could one day divide the brothers. That prediction had made the document feel dangerous. William turned toward Charles and asked whether he had approved the suppression. The king did not answer. His silence stretched until it became an answer of its own. Then he admitted he had known the letter was being withheld and had failed to challenge the decision. He did not blame Camilla. He did not defend himself. He acknowledged that doing nothing had allowed the choice to stand. William placed Diana's pages between them and removed his hand. "Neither of you owned this," he said quietly. Camilla looked down. Charles remained motionless. The prince rejected both explanations and told his father that the issue had moved beyond forgiveness. He now wanted to know who possessed the authority to keep the letter buried. The confrontation exposed the betrayal, but it also raised a colder question. Because if Camilla had made the request, and Charles had tolerated it, someone still had to possess the authority to decide whether their silence could stand. Royal families survive on boundaries: private versus public, personal versus constitutional, family property versus historical record. Diana's letter had slipped directly into those boundaries. Camilla had wanted it withheld. Charles had allowed the silence. But the court now had to determine whether either of them possessed the authority to interfere with correspondence intended for William and Harry. Suddenly, a family decision made behind closed doors had become something no palace door could contain. Charles read the legal summary alone and understood immediately what had changed. The court was examining whether custodians of Diana-related correspondence could block a clearly personal letter from reaching her sons indefinitely. A custodian, in this setting, meant the person or office responsible for holding and protecting private records. Temporary restriction could be justified. Permanent silence, without continuing legal grounds, was another matter entirely. For William, that distinction mattered, because the letter was never meant to become palace property, constitutional evidence, or historical material first. It was a mother's message, addressed to the sons she feared losing. Camilla felt the language turning against her. The queen consort had framed the decision as family judgment, a painful attempt to prevent old wounds from reopening around William, Harry, and Charles. Now the proceedings were stripping away that protection. What she had called caution was being examined as interference. What she had called prevention was being measured against a mother's right to communicate with her children. Charles removed his glasses and read the conclusion again. The king saw that no permanent order had ever forbidden William or Harry from receiving the letter. The restriction had survived because nobody senior enough reversed it. He folded the page once, carefully, then asked everyone except one advisor to leave. His next question was quieter. Had William already been told? The answer made the silence heavier. Court records showed Camilla's intervention had been the decisive act that stopped the transfer, while Charles's failure to challenge it allowed the decision to continue. The judge rejected the idea that the letter had remained hidden because of simple archival caution. The legal finding now placed personal responsibility exactly where the family had tried to keep ambiguity. William received that conclusion without satisfaction. The prince had wanted clarity, and now he had it. But clarity did not feel like victory. Then the court ordered related records released. Among them sat an internal note from years earlier, showing Diana's letter had once been prepared for transfer directly to him. The legal judgment removed the last shield around the decision, and when the supporting files were released, William discovered something almost more painful than the hiding itself. His mother's letter had once been within reach. The most devastating discovery was not that Diana's letter had remained hidden for years. It was how close William had come to receiving it. One newly released palace note recorded an earlier plan to place the envelope among personal items being transferred directly to him. His name was already on the internal delivery list. Then the instruction changed. The letter vanished from the package, and William lived on without ever knowing that his mother's words had nearly reached his hands. William stared at the administrative record longer than he had stared at the court ruling. An administrative record was simply an internal document used to track decisions, transfers, and instructions inside the royal household. This one carried no grand language. It did not need any. Diana's letter had been listed among personal correspondence scheduled to go directly to him, alongside other family material that moved forward normally. The loss suddenly became painfully measurable. William traced his finger down the old delivery sheet until it reached his own name. Beside it sat the reference to Diana's letter. The prince whispered, "It was already coming to me," then pushed the document away. The bundle had reached final preparation before a handwritten amendment ordered one item retained. Everything else continued. Only that message stopped. Harry learned the same detail separately and reacted with anger. He was not only furious that the letter had been withheld from him and William, he was furious that the truth had reached them through legal disclosure instead of family honesty. Diana had written to both sons, yet neither had been trusted with her words. The brothers were now discovering their mother's intentions through records created by the people who had delayed them. Then the timing tightened the chain. The amendment had been made within 24 hours of the Clarence House meeting, where Camilla argued that the letter should remain buried. Another internal note showed that a staff member later asked whether the restriction should be reviewed. No review followed. What may have begun as a temporary intervention hardened into years of silence, and because nobody with enough authority reopened the question. William understood that the next choice belonged to him. He could answer Camilla's decision with public retaliation, exposing every detail and allowing anger to define the response. Or he could return to Diana's warning about inherited resentment and ask whether punishing one generation would simply pass the same conflict into another. For the first time since the revelation, anger was no longer the only force guiding William. Diana's warning about inherited resentment was beginning to challenge him, and the next decision would determine whether her hidden letter caused another fracture or finally stopped one. After judges, lawyers, advisors, courtiers, and years of palace silence, the turning point required none of them. William and Harry met privately with Diana's letter between them. No officials sat nearby. No statement was prepared. For perhaps the first time since the secret emerged, the document belonged only to the two people Diana had written about. And as they read their mother's fears about resentment, loyalty, and brotherhood, the scandal suddenly became something larger than Camilla's decision. William had chosen to share the complete letter before deciding how hard he wanted the palace to respond. The prince knew that punishment would be easy to demand, while anger was still fresh. Harry understood why. Diana's words were personal, not institutional, and a private family letter meant exactly that. A message intended for specific people, rather than for public or official use. For both brothers, that distinction mattered, because the court had exposed the secret, but only they could decide what their mother's words meant. Harry reached one passage and stopped. Diana warned that neither son should ever be forced to choose between loyalty to family members and loyalty to each other. He read the lines again, visibly shaken by how closely they seemed to echo the fractures that came later. William watched him in silence, then admitted that his first instinct after the ruling had been punishment. He had wanted consequences strong enough to match the years that had been taken from them. The letter changed that instinct. Diana had not written to condemn Camilla. She had not tried to recruit her sons into an old war, or ask them to carry her anger forward. Instead, she focused on William and Harry, warning them not to mistake inherited conflict for their own truth. That discovery cut through the entire scandal. The very document Camilla feared might revive hostility was actually asking Diana's sons not to let hostility control them. For William, restraint no longer meant weakness. For Harry, refusing revenge did not mean forgetting. It meant denying the old conflict one more victory over them both. Harry finished the paragraph and handed the page silently to William. The prince read it again, folded the letter carefully, and said they would not allow anyone else to decide what their mother's words meant. Harry agreed. Accountability would still come. Camilla's decision would not be excused, and Charles's silence would not be erased. But revenge would not become Diana's legacy either. Their private decision gave Diana's message back to her sons, but outside that room, the revelation was already becoming a national spectacle, and the monarchy would now have to answer publicly for a secret it had protected privately. By morning, The story no longer belonged to the court or the royal household. Diana's name dominated television bulletins, newspaper covers, radio discussions, and crowds outside royal gates. But one image captured the public reaction more powerfully than any headline. People arriving outside Kensington Palace carrying flowers beside handwritten notes, addressed not to a princess or a queen, but simply to Diana's boys. The hidden letter had touched an emotional memory Britain had never completely surrendered. William saw the coverage and immediately understood the danger. The palace had issued a formal acknowledgement, meaning an official statement accepting the court's findings while asking the public to respect how he and Harry handled the letter privately. That mattered because the scandal now rested on three painful facts. Diana had written with concern for her sons, Camilla had helped keep the message from them, and Charles had failed to reverse that decision. The prince knew one private wound was becoming national judgment. Camilla watched the reaction alone after canceling a scheduled engagement. The queen consort had lived for years under public scrutiny tied to Diana, but this criticism felt different. It was no longer centered on old romantic history. It focused on one decision involving a mother's words and her children. When a fictional national newspaper appeared with the front page Diana's letter kept from her boys, she lowered the television volume and removed her glasses. Moments later, Charles entered and quietly closed the door. William refused to let the frenzy consume the letter itself. He instructed staff that Diana's complete words would not be released, because exposing every private sentence would turn something meant for him and Harry into public entertainment. The prince wanted accountability, not spectacle. Harry supported that decision, and together, the brothers kept control of the one thing the court had finally returned to them. Outside Kensington Palace, emotion gathered in a quieter form. A small crowd left flowers and handwritten messages near the gates. One note read, "Her words belong to them." Broadcasters repeated the phrase through the evening, and it became the simplest expression of what many believed the case had exposed. Diana's message had been treated like something the institution could manage. The public saw it as something her sons should always have possessed. William now knew headlines could punish Camilla and embarrass Charles, but punishment alone could not repair what happened. He prepared one final private meeting with both of them, determined to define accountability without allowing rage to write the ending. Public opinion had delivered its anger, but William understood that headlines could punish without healing. The final verdict would therefore be decided inside the family, where Diana's missing words had caused the deepest wound. In the end, the most important outcome was not a courtroom victory, a palace humiliation, or even the damage to Camilla's standing. It was something quieter. Diana's letter finally reached the two people she had written it for. William and Harry could not recover the years in which those words had been missing. Charles could not undo his silence. Camilla could not reverse her decision. But the family could decide whether the secret would become another inheritance of bitterness or end with them. William met Charles and Camilla one final time after the uproar, carrying the certified copy, but refusing to debate Diana's words. A certified copy is a verified reproduction matching the original document, and for the prince, it now represented more than evidence. He set a boundary. Every remaining personal letter intended for Diana's children had to be reviewed and transferred without interference from anyone whose interests conflicted with theirs. The rule was simple. No one would decide again what her sons were allowed to receive. Camilla did not defend herself this time. The queen consort accepted that she had initiated the suppression and admitted that fear had shaped her judgment. She had believed the letter might reopen old wounds around Charles and the boys, but she no longer argued that fear justified withholding it. William listened without offering comfort. Forgiveness could not be demanded simply because responsibility had finally been spoken aloud. Charles struggled more openly with his own part. The king told William that remaining silent had been a decision, even if he had once treated it as avoidance. He admitted that his failure to intervene allowed Camilla's request to survive. The prince accepted the admission, without pretending it repaired the missing years. Accountability mattered precisely because regret could not restore them. William also refused public revenge. Diana's warning had changed him. If he allowed inherited resentment to control another generation, he would repeat the pattern his mother feared. Harry agreed through a private conversation with his brother that the letter should remain theirs, not become permanent evidence in a public war. Together, Diana's sons reclaimed her message as something intimate, rather than something owned by scandal. William lifted the letter from the table before leaving. Charles remained seated. Camilla looked toward him but said nothing. The prince folded the pages carefully and carried them away. There would be no restoring the lost time, but secrecy had finally lost its authority. Diana's words had reached her sons. Responsibility had been accepted, and resentment would not have the final word. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.